Hi, I'm Kat from Wild Alaskan Company. I work on the recipe team. I am coming in live from Brooklyn, New York. Today, we're going to show you how to make a very delicious, simple fish chowder. It's something that I think will get you through the chilly days of winter. And a lot of the ingredients that we're using actually are things that have a long shelf life. So they last in your fridge for a while, they last in your pantry for a while, the raw ingredients themselves. So ultimately, a really great recipe that you can make from mostly pantry staples. That means you don't have to leave the house during a blizzard or on a cold day. So it's a Pacific cod stew with chunky tomatoes and coconut. A little ingredient list here. So as you can see, most of those ingredients are ones that are either cellar vegetables, roots, potatoes, carrots, onions, or things that can live in your pantry like spices, coconut milk. The only thing here that definitely doesn't have a long shelf life is fresh herbs. Those are, in my opinion, delicious, but always optional if you don't have them. So the soup, the chowder, whatever we're making still works. So I am going to be presenting a non-traditional chowder. When I think of chowder, I think of white potatoes like russet or Yukons and milk or cream. That's like the classic New England chowder style of chowder that I have in my head. But today we're making something a little bit different. We're using sweet potatoes, coconut milk, and then some spices, warm spices like cumin and paprika. I went ahead and added some of the sweet potato to the soup pot here just to get it started. Potatoes always take a little bit longer. But going back to the chowder, I love this chowder because I always have a couple of cans of coconut milk in my pantry, whereas I almost never have milk or cream in the fridge. So this is just one that I find is a great go-to to have. I love swapping in something like a sweet potato rather than a regular potato because, first of all, they last a lot longer, even as a root vegetable. Anytime I buy a regular potato, I end up not using it soon enough and it gets a little mushy and starts growing weird things. These will take a lot longer before they start growing weird things. It's also really nice for flavor, color, and just that really nice, rich fall feeling. So that being said, let me go ahead and introduce the fish here. So what I have today is actually a fillet of Pacific halibut. This one's actually a little bit of a long one, so it's folded over, but I've got fillet of Pacific halibut, another white, mild, flaky fish, and I believe this is cod and not regular cod. It was in a mystery bag in my fridge. So just to start out by saying, you can make this chowder with any fish. I know I advertised it as cod, but cod, yellow eye rockfish, halibut, lingcod, even something like wild Alaska pollock quick cuts are a really, really good option for this stew. If you don't have any whitefish, salmon, excellent choice. So that's the fish that we're using today. And I think this is sort of like the classic, more classic flavor that I'm looking for. Great alternatives. I have sweet potato, just like a regular sweet potato, olive oil, garlic, onion, but you can use any color onion. Red onion is nice just for the sweetness and color, but I actually used a yellow onion myself today. So that's what I really like about a chowder or soup. You can mix and match a lot of the ingredients and really expect that you're going to end up with a delicious soup in the end. You can't really break the recipe very much. So all these spices in here, cumin, paprika, they're developing a really nice, rich aroma and color and crust on the bottom of the pan. It looks amazing. But what I'm going to do now is kind of break up that crust. So I have a can of regular coconut milk, unsweetened, obviously, and pour that in here. So this is going to be that creamy, milky base of a chowder, and this is going to give that really satisfying fall feel to it without having all the dairy. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with dairy. I'm slightly lactose intolerant myself, so I'm happy to have something that's a little bit dairy-free when it's this rich. And then I'm adding in tomatoes as well. I actually added in whole tomatoes. I think they have a really nice juiciness and texture. We'll break these up as they get a little bit softer, but you can start to see this color coming together. It looks so fall colored. If fall has a color, it's definitely everything that's in the pot right now. So we're going to bring this to a simmer. I just raised the heat a little bit to get that bubbling, and then we can turn it down so that everything cooks a little bit gently. Let me go ahead and set my timer so I don't forget. Let's see. So I'll cook this for about 5 minutes and we'll check on it then. While you're here, if you have a bunch of those spices that are kind of crusted onto the bottom of the pan, just take a wooden spoon and do a little bit of scraping. So you're going to get all those flavors like up from the bottom of the pot, and it's really going to make the dish a lot more delicious. So in the meantime, what I can do is cut these into smaller pieces. You don't have to cut fish into smaller pieces, but it just makes it a little bit easier to enjoy later. The recipe says to cut them into actually diagonal pieces, which I think is kind of cool. I'm not sure why the recipe developer did that, but I always do that for this recipe. So it'll flake really nicely and cook nice and evenly if you can get them to be around the same size. These, oop, I hear some bubbling. So as you can see, it's a little bubbly around the edges. This is the time to turn down the heat to medium low, something like that, just so we get a nice little bubble going. And let me cut this halibut into a couple triangles as well. All right. Maybe I'll cut this piece into something a little bit smaller. You want them to be around the same size so that they're done around the same time. Yum, this is going to be so good. One thing I'll also say is that one of my pieces is still frozen. You probably can't tell here, but this is hard as a rock inside. Not too hard to cut through, but this is a great type of recipe to use with frozen fish, especially when you're using something like Pacific halibut quick cuts or wild Alaska pollock quick cuts. When the pieces are already cut into smaller portions, they're a little bit smaller than this, but that's a great thing to just throw into the pot at the end. If you're using a full fillet and trying to cook from frozen, like not accidentally meaning to, but actually wanting to, then what I would suggest is picking a thinner fillet. The thinnest fillet you have in your freezer is going to be the best option because it'll cook more evenly than a really chunky, thick piece of fish. These were defrosted, or that ling cod that I was saying was a bit frozen was defrosted enough for me to slice through. So that'll help these cook a little bit more evenly once they are actually into the pot. The recipe for this also suggests marinating the fish in lime juice. While we're waiting for the stew to simmer, we can go ahead and do that. You can marinate it for up to 30 minutes. So I'm just going to put these into a little bowl of fish. So I'm not putting this in the pot yet, just want to show you. And we can just squeeze some lime juice over that. And this will add a little bit of extra flavor to the fish. We don't want to let it sit in a citrusy acid for longer than half an hour, because then, especially when you're cutting it into smaller pieces like this, you're going to accidentally make ceviche, and that is not the texture that we're going for here. So to this, I'll just add a little bit of salt and pepper. And just checking on the stew as I turn my back, looks like it's bubbling away very nicely. And I probably will let that cook for a little while longer, but I will show you what this fish looks like. So a little salt and pepper, give that a little turn in there. And then the fish will get really nice and flavorful. So we are adding moisture to this. We are adding salt to this, which pulls out the moisture from the fish. So these are things that you won't want to do if you're searing fish or if you're grilling it. You want to be careful about doing it in any case. Marinating is totally okay, but you do want to pat the fish dry before you cook it if you're grilling, searing, baking, broiling. But since we're using this fish in a soup, we don't have to worry about there being moisture on the fish or the salt pulling out moisture from the fish. This can go right into the pot later and it'll be super flavorful. Hopefully that makes sense. I feel like I talked in a little bit of a circle, but I didn't bring basil with me because I didn't have any. So I'm actually just using cilantro today. Now that it's winter, the pickings are a little slim. Well, so that being said, we are on to the next phase of this stew. So I keep calling it a stew, but I want to call it a chowder. So what I'm doing right now is actually just crushing the tomatoes in there, and they crush really easily. Whole peeled tomatoes, really just giving way to the back of the spoon here. And that's going to add a little bit more texture to the chowder and really some more juices into this. This would be a good time to taste. So let's go ahead and do that. This could use a bit more salt, which I put over here. Really flavorful though, honestly. If I forgot to put salt in, I wouldn't miss it at all, especially because we're going to be adding in a little bit of lime juice later, but this is me not forgetting to put the salt in, and I think it'll bring that flavor that I'm looking for. Now would be the time to add in the fish. And before I do that, I actually want to show you, I'm not sure if you can really tell, but the fish is starting to denature a little bit, getting a little bit white because of that lime juice. So that if we leave the fish in the marinade too long, it's going to start looking like it's cooked through. It's going to get that opaque appearance because we will have accidentally made ceviche. I'm going to put these into the pan now. And I'll probably reduce the heat a little bit so we don't boil the fish. We want to just poach it in the chowder. Oh, this looks so good. All right, so we're gonna submerge this in the liquid. And I'm gonna check on this about the 5-minute mark to see how they're flaking. Let me put this on low. So that'll bubble away here gently in the background. So anytime there's a recipe where you don't have the herbs, I don't think that should prevent you from making the recipe. Absolutely fresh herbs, basil, cilantro, lime, dill, they're going to make a huge difference in flavor, but they're not, I would argue, integral to the dish. If the option is to not make chowder or make it, I would always opt to actually just make what you're making and then maybe add in a little bit of extra flavor with what have you, for this case, lime or a little extra spice mix or a little extra garlic, just to give what you're making a little extra oomph. It's not ever going to be a stand-in for fresh herbs, but there are so many times when I don't want to buy a giant bunch of dill because I only know I want a sprig of it and I don't want to toss the rest. Things like that. Or, I mentioned earlier, I don't want to leave the house and I don't have herbs. Totally okay. But I did leave the house for cilantro today. So let me just give this fish a little bit of a stir here. So these are starting to turn opaque. So it's going to be just a matter of time now before these are ready to eat. The only finishing touches that we're really going to add to this once this is off of the heat is the cilantro and some fresh lime juice. So that will be kind of the flavors that really pull everything together, especially the lime. That's the one thing that I would say. You can still make the chowder without the lime, but this is going to give it that really vibrant taste. If you don't have lime, you can use lemon. It'll not be the same flavor profile, but you'll have that fresh, bright acidity to kind of balance out the richness of the flavors, the spices, the coconut milk, the sweet potatoes. So let me give it a little bit of a taste. I'll grab another spoon here. I know the fish is not totally done, but I'm still going to taste a little bit of the broth here. See how it's tasting today. So for me, I find that it doesn't have a super strong coconut flavor because we have the tomatoes in there and also the paprika, cumin. Those flavors are the ones that are a little more pronounced to me than the coconut milk itself. If this was just pure coconut milk with some lime, for sure, I would say that coconut milk is like the #1 flavor that would come to my mind. But just giving this like taste while we're thinking about that. Spices and tomato are really the things that are coming through. The coconut milk in this particular chowder feels more like the richness or the fat element. So if you're not a huge fan of coconut milk, but you still want to try this recipe, you might actually find that it's a pretty good one to try. All right. So these pieces look pretty flaky to me. Let me just give it a little spoon here. This piece here is just flaking apart really easily with the spoon, as you can see, like that perfect little sliver of fish. I'll just check this other piece. The frozen ones might need a little more time. No, that's pretty flaky. I think this is done. We can go ahead and transfer this to a bowl. Yum. Let me grab my ladle and serve up a really nice, cozy bowl of fish chowder. Like I said, the triangles probably not necessary, but they just make it look really, really pretty. Almost like dumplings, which feels very cozy to me visually. Squares or whatever shapes you end up cutting it into, totally fine. And we're gonna just sprinkle some cilantro on top and use this other lime half just to squeeze and give this a final chef's taste. Let me get this little flaky piece here. This smells really fragrant, really rich. From start to finish, I would say the chowder takes about a half hour. Even with a little bit of prep, maybe it'll add like 5 minutes or so because the prep is pretty simple, but Mm, very hot, but so good. I love that lime flavor on top of the tomato. It really brings out the sweetness and acidity of the rest of the dish. The cilantro is super delicious in it. If you can manage to get some, I wouldn't skip it. Still going to be really good without it, but just that little extra crunch and freshness right on top is really, really nice. So that's it. That is the coconut cod chowder that we made today with ling cod, which is not a cod, and Pacific halibut, which is not cod either. But amazing, amazing meal. Thank you all for being here. And I really hope you get to try making either this fish chowder or a different style of fish chowder when you have a chance at some point this winter. The chowder itself, if you're making a batch to keep for the next few days to enjoy as a leftover meal, I would say you can store it for up to 3 days in the fridge and feel pretty good about that. Just make sure you cool it down before you put it in a container and then move it to the fridge. I'm not afraid of eating fish after 3 days, but generally we recommend up to 3 days for for eating leftover seafood. So if you're thinking about freezing it, this could be a good option for freezing the chowder. You know, the fish is going to not be quite as flaky and moist whenever you're reheating it in that case, and even from the fridge, but reheating it from the freezer, depending on how long it's in there, it can really dry the fish out. But because it's kind of soupy, that might not make a huge difference to you. It's totally up to your palate. I think this is a good candidate for freezing. I haven't tried it myself because I will definitely be eating this in the next couple of days. It's so good. That's it for today. Next week, before you head out, I'm hosting a event as usual, but it's going to be formatted a little bit differently. We're going to cook together. It's still going to be webinar format. I really want to see your faces, but the webinar format is the easiest way for me to do this. We're going to be cooking salmon from frozen on the stovetop. Very little prep required. Just show up with your frozen fish and we'll have a little cook along. It'll be fun, hopefully, and maybe lunch or a very early dinner for you. So I hope to see some of you there, if not all of you. All right, well, that's it for today. Thank you so much for being here and live wild. Happy Wednesday.